full 5-minute documentary opening monologue, Universal Numbers Group, UN Group, the 12.89-second difference. For as long as human beings have watched the sky, eclipses have stood apart. They are among the rarest and most arresting events in nature. They are moments when the ordinary rhythm of the heavens seems to pause, align, and reveal something hidden. Ancient cultures feared them. Astronomers learned to predict them. Modern science explained them through celestial mechanics, through orbital periods, through the repeating relationships between the sun, the earth, and the moon. And yet, even within that deep scientific understanding, eclipses remain extraordinary. They recur, but they do not recur perfectly. They follow patterns. But those patterns drift. They belong to families known as Saros series, and those series begin, evolve, and eventually end. That much is standard astronomy. But the Universal Numbers Group begins with a question that pushes deeper. What if eclipse recurrence is more structured than standard presentation has yet revealed? What if, beneath the catalog of dates and cycles, there exists a larger recurrence architecture? Not only a sequence in time, not only an astronomical repetition, but an architecture of order, an architecture of grouping, spatial landing, recurrence, pair structure, and numerical relation. At the center of that question is a number so small that most people would dismiss it immediately: 12.89 seconds, less than 13 seconds. That is the difference the Universal Numbers Group places under examination. At first hearing, it seems insignificant, but eclipse recurrence is not governed by single isolated moments. It is governed by repeated returns, by month after month, cycle after cycle, series after series. And inside a system like that, a very small mismatch does not remain small. It repeats, it accumulates, it propagates through the structure. And that is where this work begins. Standard eclipse theory teaches that recurrence depends on near relationships between the lunar months that govern phase, nodal return, and orbital distance. Those relationships are close enough to create repeating eclipse patterns, but not exact enough to prevent long-term drift. That is why Saros series do not continue forever. They shift, they evolve, and they terminate. The Universal Numbers Group asks whether that incompleteness is the final truth of the eclipse system, or whether it is the visible result of one tiny residual difference at the heart of the recurrence mechanism. In the UN Group interpretation, if the draconic month were shorter by approximately 12.89 seconds, the consequences would not be minor. They would be structural. They would affect whether the eclipse architecture remains partial or moves toward closure. And nowhere is that possibility more striking than in the currently active 39 solar Saros series. In standard astronomy, those 39 series are recognized as the present active range. In the UN group work, they are treated not simply as a list, but as a structured recurrence body, a body with order, a body with sequence, a body with internal architecture. In this view, the question is no longer merely whether eclipses repeat. The question becomes whether the recurrence architecture itself closes, and whether a difference as small as 12.89 seconds may stand between the eclipse system we currently observe and a fuller system that the UN group believes is structurally present. This is why the 12.89-second diagram matters so much. It is not powerful because the number is large. It is powerful because the number is small, because it forces a confrontation between intuition and structure. Our intuition says that 12.89 seconds should not matter, but the diagram asks the viewer to consider a different possibility, that in a deeply repeated celestial system, one tiny mismatch may be enough to shape an entire world of return. The historical weight of that question is not small. Modern lunar theory was built through generations of observation and mathematical refinement. Figures such as George William Hill and Ernest W. Brown helped establish the precision framework through which lunar motion and eclipse recurrence came to be understood at the highest level. So the UN group is not placing this question in empty space. It is placing it in relation to one of the most disciplined inheritances in celestial mechanics. That is part of what gives this work its gravity. It does not merely ask whether a new pattern can be noticed. It asks whether a very small, unresolved difference may have consequences larger than anyone expected. And the UN group does not stop at the level of one numerical proposition. The broader recurrence architecture extends into a full structured world: groups, zones, sequence order, observed and unobserved eclipse positions, and a larger wheel-based field in which recurrence is treated not only as something that happens in time, but as something that lands in ordered space. Within that larger architecture, the universal numbers group AGT appears as one especially concentrated internal expression of the same deeper order. There, a selected body of eclipses is arranged into pairs and waves. Durations converge. Zodiacal placements form visible symmetries. Wheel connectors produce repeated numerical relations. What the full recurrence architecture presents at the largest scale, the UN group AGT reveals in a concentrated and visually immediate form. Together, they suggest that eclipse recurrence may not be a loose collection of repeating events, but a layered architecture in which sequence, symmetry, grouping, placement, and numerical relation are all parts of one coherent system. That is why the design of the UN group diagrams matters. These are not simply illustrations placed beside an argument. They are meant to let the structure be seen, to let the architecture present itself, to reduce the need for insistence and increase the possibility of recognition. Because in the end, the force of this work does not come from rhetoric. It comes from whether the structure holds, whether the positions match, whether the timings align, whether the recurrence logic survives scrutiny, whether the architecture speaks in its own language. And if it does, then the meaning of the 12.89-second difference changes completely. It stops being a tiny number in a technical discussion. It becomes a threshold between the eclipse system as presently observed and the fuller recurrence order the universal numbers group believes may lie behind it. This is the question the UN group places before the viewer. Not whether the heavens repeat, but whether they repeat with a deeper order than we have yet been willing to see. This is the universal numbers group, and this is the beginning of the full recurrence architecture.